There is an old saying that writers should write what they know. Authors spend their lives researching, imagining, and constructing scenarios. They ask, what if? They create villains. They create plots. They create the perfect crime on paper, knowing that in the safety of fiction there are no consequences. But sometimes, the line between the page and reality gets blurred. Sometimes the author isn't just brainstorming a plot twist, they are planning an execution. Imagine a blog post published online. It is titled, How to Murder Your Husband. In this essay, the author breaks down the pros and cons of different methods of killing. She writes about poison, too messy, takes too long. She writes about hearing a hitman, they always snitch. She writes about using a gun, loud, messy, requires skill. She concludes the essay with a chilling thought. Asterisk. The thing I know about murder is that every one of us has it in him or her when pushed far enough. When readers saw this post, they laughed. They thought it was dark humor. They thought it was a romance novelist letting off steam. They didn't know that the woman who wrote those words, Nancy Brophy, wasn't just entertaining her fans. She was rehearsing. She was foreshadowing. And on a misty morning in Portland, Oregon, she decided to take her research out of the laptop and into the real world. She decided to prove that the perfect crime asterisk was asterisk possible if you built the gun yourself. This is the story of the romance novelist killer. It is a story of financial desperation masked by a cozy suburban life. It is the story of a ghost gun, assembled piece by piece to fool ballistics experts. And it is the story of a courtroom trial where the defendant's own words, her own how to guide, became the ghost that haunted her defense. If you are fascinated by the moment when art imitates death, if you want to know how a woman can sleep next to a man for 25 years and then treat him like a disposable character in a cheap paperback, please hit that subscribe asterisk button right now. You need to hear this story because it proves that sometimes the plot twist isn't in the book, it's in the writer's hand. To understand the tragedy, we have to look at the couple. Daniel Brophy was a man who loved life. He was 63 years old. He was a chef. But he wasn't just a cook, he was a teacher. He worked at the Oregon Culinary Institute in Portland. He was beloved by his students. He was the mushroom guy. He was funny, kind, and incredibly skilled. He was the kind of teacher who changed lives. He had a routine. Every morning he woke up early, fed the chickens in the backyard, packed his gear, and drove to the institute to prep the kitchen before the students arrived. Nancy Brophy was his wife. She was 68. She was a self-published romance novelist. Her books had steamy covers and dramatic titles like The Wrong Husband and The Wrong Cop asterisk. They lived in the suburbs. They had been married for over 20 years. To the outside world, they were eccentric but happy. They were Dan and Nancy, the chef and the writer. But inside the house, the romance was dead. And it was being replaced by a much colder reality, math. Nancy Brophy was a spender. Dan was a saver. But they were drowning. They were paying over $1,000 a month just for life insurance premiums. Nancy's books weren't selling. She wasn't the next Danielle Steele. She was losing money. They were facing foreclosure. They were dipping into their 401ks. Nancy looked at her life. She looked at her debt. And then she looked at Dan. She realized that Dan was worth more dead than he was alive. Specifically, he was worth $1.4 million in life insurance policies. For a storyteller, the plot was simple. Remove the husband, keep the money, start a new chapter. June 2, 2018. It was a quiet Saturday morning. Dan woke up early as always. He fed the chickens. He kissed Nancy goodbye, or maybe she pretended to be asleep. He drove to the Oregon Culinary Institute. He arrived around 7:20 a.m. He walked into the kitchen. He started prepping for the day. He was filling buckets with water and ice. He was alone. It was quiet. The students wouldn't arrive for another hour. At 7:27 a.m., a figure walked into the kitchen. We don't know if Dan turned around. We don't know if he said, "Oh, hi, honey." We only know that the figure raised a 9 Glock pistol. Bang! The first shot hit Dan in the back. It pierced his spine. He fell to the floor, paralyzed, helpless. He was looking up at the ceiling, or maybe he was looking up at his wife. The killer stood over him. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a panic shooting. This was an execution. Bang! A second shot, point blank straight into the chest. It pierced his heart. Dan Brophy died on the floor of the kitchen he loved, surrounded by his culinary tools. The killer turned around. They walked out. They got in their car. And they drove away. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. When the students arrived at 8:00 a.m., they found their beloved Chef Dan lying in a pool of blood. They tried CPR. It was too late. The police arrived. They identified the victim. They called the wife. Nancy Brophy arrived at the scene. And she began her performance. But it wasn't the hysterical performance we've seen in other cases. It was a stoic one. She didn't cry much. She seemed practical. She told the police, "I was at home sleeping. I woke up when you called." She played the role of the shocked spouse. Who would hurt Dan, she asked. Everyone loved him. 2 days later, she went to a candlelight vigil outside the school. She stood in front of the cameras. She held a candle. She told the press, "I'm overwhelmed by the love." But then she said something odd, something that made people pause. She said, "I'm a writer, and it's hard to wrap my head around this because it feels like a story I would write, but I didn't write it." It was a slip, a tiny glimpse into her psyche. She was viewing this tragedy as a narrative, not a reality. And then she went to Facebook. She posted a status update. "For my Facebook friends and family, I have sad news to relate. My husband and best friend, Chef Dan Brophy, was killed yesterday morning. I am struggling to make sense of everything right now." It was efficient. It was clean. It was almost like a press release for a book launch. The police were baffled at first. Who kills a chef? There were no enemies, no drug debts. Was it a robbery gone wrong? But nothing was stolen. His wallet was still there. So they started looking at the cameras. The Culinary Institute had cameras, but not in the kitchen. However, the businesses around the Institute asterisk did have cameras pointing at the street. Detectives sat down to watch hours of footage from that Saturday morning. They were looking for suspicious cars. And they found one. A minivan. An older model Toyota minivan. It was driving around the block at 7:08 a.m., then again at 7:28 a.m. It looked familiar. The detectives checked the registration of Nancy Brophy's car. It was the same minivan. Wait. Nancy said she was sleeping. She said she was in bed until 8:00 a.m. Why was her minivan circling the crime scene at the exact moment of the murder? When they confronted her, Nancy's story changed. "Oh," she said, "I forgot I did go out. I was writing. I needed inspiration. I drove around to look at the trees. I must have been in a daze. It was the writer's block alibi. But the police weren't buying it, driving 20 minutes to the murder scene for inspiration at the exact time of the murder. It was too convenient. But having a car at the scene isn't enough. They needed the weapon. They knew Dan was killed with a 9 Glock. They asked Nancy, "Do you own a gun?" "Yes," she said. "I bought one for research and for self-defense. After the Parkland shooting, I felt unsafe." She showed them her gun. The police took it to the lab. They test-fired it. They compared the striations on the bullets to the bullets found in Dan's body. It was a mismatch. The gun Nancy gave them was not the murder weapon. The police were confused. Had they got the wrong person? But then they looked deeper into Nancy's finances. They looked at her online shopping history. And they found the plot twist. Nancy Brophy hadn't just bought one gun. She had bought a ghost gun kit online, a kit to build a gun that has no serial number. But she couldn't figure out how to assemble it. So she went to eBay. And she bought a separate slide and barrel for a Glock 17. The slide and barrel are the parts of the gun that leave the unique marks on the bullet. She bought these parts months before the murder. Here was the theory. Nancy took her legal Glock. She swapped out the barrel with the new one she bought on eBay. She used the Frankenstein gun to kill Dan. Then she went home. She took the murder barrel off. She put the original clean barrel back on. She handed the clean gun to the police. And the murder barrel, it has never been found. She likely threw it in a river or buried it. It was brilliant. It was forensic genius. It showed a level of understanding of ballistics that only a crime writer or a cold-blooded killer would have. September 2018, Nancy Brophy is arrested. The trial didn't happen until April 2022, delayed by the pandemic. It was a media circus. The romance novelist trial. The courtroom was packed. Nancy Brophy took the stand in her own defense. She wore a mask. She looked like a sweet grandmother. But her testimony was bizarre. The prosecutor asked about the minivan. "Why were you there, Nancy?" "Nancy, I had a memory hole. I was just driving. I don't remember being there, but if I was just thinking about my writing." Prosecutor, "You were thinking about writing while driving past the place your husband was dying." Nancy, "Coincidences happen." Then they asked about the gun parts. "Why did you buy a separate slide and barrel on eBay?" Nancy, "Research. It was for a book. I was writing a story about a woman who had to build a gun." Prosecutor, "Where is that barrel now?" Nancy, "I don't know. Maybe I lost it." And then came the elephant in the room. The essay, "How to Murder Your Husband." The judge actually ruled that the essay itself couldn't be used as direct evidence because it was written years earlier, 2011, and was technically fiction. However, the asterisk prosecution used the themes of the essay to dismantle her defense. In the essay, Nancy wrote about financial motivation. She wrote, "Divorce is expensive, and you really don't want to split your possessions." She wrote, "If you kill him, you get to keep the house and the life insurance." The prosecutor laid out the finances. Nancy and Dan were broke. They were about to lose everything. If Dan lived, they were poor. If Dan died, Nancy got $1.4 million. She didn't kill him because she hated him, the prosecutor argued. She killed him because she couldn't afford him anymore. Nancy's defense was essentially, "I'm a kooky writer. I buy weird things for research. I drive around in a daze. I just have bad luck. She tried to charm the jury. She made jokes on the stand. When asked about her relationship with Dan, she said, "We had a great romance." But the evidence showed she had searched online for how to erase your digital footprint and police response times. Research or rehearsal. There was also a cellmate who testified. Andrea Jacobs, who was in jail with Nancy, claimed Nancy confessed to her. According to the cellmate, Nancy said, "I was this close to getting away with it." She supposedly demonstrated how she held the gun. She supposedly said, "He just wouldn't die fast enough." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty of second-degree murder. In Oregon, second-degree is the standard charge for intentional murder, unless there are specific aggravating factors. When the verdict was read, Nancy Brophy stood up. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She had the same look on her face as she did at the vigil. A look of mild disappointment, like a writer who just got a rejection letter from a publisher. She maintained her innocence. The judge sentenced her to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Nancy was 71 years old at sentencing. It is effectively a death sentence. She will die in prison. She will never spend the $1.4 million. She will never write another romance novel. The Nancy Brophy story is chilling because of the premeditation. She didn't just snap. She spent months building a gun. She spent months planning the route. She looked at her husband, the man who cooked for her, who loved her, and she reduced him to a paycheck. And the how-to essay. It forces us to wonder how much of fiction is actually fantasy. When an author writes about a perfect murder, are they exploring the dark side of humanity, or are they exploring their own dark side? Nancy Brophy proved that for her, the keyboard was just a training ground for the trigger. She thought she was smarter than the police. She thought she could write the perfect ending. But she forgot the most important rule of crime fiction. The villain always makes one mistake. Her mistake was the minivan. She couldn't write herself out of the footage. Dan Brophy was a teacher. He taught his students how to create. Nancy Brophy was a writer. She taught herself how to destroy. In the end, her greatest work wasn't a novel. It was a tragedy. A tragedy where the protagonist thought she was the hero, but the audience knew she was the monster all along. This story is absolutely wild. The fact that she bought the gun parts on eBay for research is the most audacious defense I've ever heard. Do you think artists and writers should be judged by their dark search histories? Where is the line between research and intent? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy stories where the arrogance of the killer leads to their downfall, please hit that asterisk button and subscribe ***. I have a story coming next week about a man who faked his own kidnapping to get out of work, but sparked a nationwide manhunt that cost millions. Stay safe, watch your back, and be careful what you write down.